At the age of 5, I had a plan. I had a plan to become an astronaut, but not just any astronaut. I planned to be the first astronaut to land on Mars. Now, I was smart enough to realize that I didn't actually have access to NASA's training resources at the time, which might come as a surprise to you. But what I did know is that I could learn as much as I wanted. So I did that. I went to YouTube and I watched a video about space facts. Now, it told me everything about how far each planet was away from the sun, their temperatures, and how many moons they had. And I committed it all to memory. I told everyone I knew about this dream, and I did it while smiling from ear to ear. But eventually, I hit the age of 10, and I realized that this dream would take a couple of years to complete. So I decided that instead of focusing on my future dream, I should focus on learning for grade 4 while I was in grade 4. And when I say focus, I really mean fixate. Because I spent endless amounts of time studying, I perfected my cursive writing, and I also made math my newest hobby. So for every hour I spent working on the next test or assignment, I was rewarded with an even higher grade. And that cycle continued. Now I'm at the age of 18. I've spent 4 years at WalterMurrayCollegiate, and I've noticed something. That there are students who feel satisfied with a 52%, and others who tear themselves apart over a 98%. So why is that? Well, regardless of if you're aiming for perfection or if you simply want to pass your English class, we are all concerned and dictated by the 100-point grading system that surrounds our learning. It's a system that's praised for its objectivity and universality, but really lacks the substance to support this appraisal. It's a system that's created a learning environment where learning has become transactional. But my biggest issue with the current grading system is that it makes us forget who we are. See, as humans, we are naturally curious. It's why we know the temperature of the sun, even though all we need to understand is that it's far too hot to touch. And it's why we've harnessed fire and created the wheel. Because we're constantly innovating towards a more productive and prosperous future. Now, when we add grades to that system, it's like telling ourselves that this internal motivation isn't enough, and that we need an external motivator, a validator, and a benchmark to facilitate learning. And when that happens, we become overly reliant on the grade, so much so that learning becomes almost purposeless without this. But once grades become our end goal, we forget the journey along the way. In fact, that journey becomes irrelevant. And it means that students are going to feel justified for using ChatGPT, or for cheating on a test, or even just choosing the easiest option on a group assignment. Because who cares if you get the number you wanted at the end of the assignment? Well, it's really opposite to everything we need to learn, and it also goes against the character that creates a great student. Because once we open the doors to valuing a grade, we open the doors to competition and to comparison. Because you can order numbers from least to greatest and 0 to 100, but you can't order creativity or intelligence or ingenuity, all aspects that make the life-changing people that we have on our globe today. So when we focus too much on the numbers, we don't just forget about the journey, but we also forget about the humanity behind what we learn. And the second thing behind the grading system is that it evaluates the wrong thing. In fact, it's counterintuitive to learning because of this. Because regardless of if you have a 60, a 70, or a 90 in your classes, your grade is determined by the mistakes that you've made or the work that you did not do. And in a math class, that might be as simple as forgetting an addition sign, or in an English class, misplacing a comma. And that's okay. But what really harms students is when we punish them for pursuing creativity in the risks that they take. Because in a standard classroom, the easiest way to succeed and the easiest way to get a good grade is by doing the same exact assignment that hundreds and thousands of students have done before you. And it also means that if you have a brilliant idea for a lab report that might not end up working, you won't do it. And if you have a compelling idea for a narrative essay that doesn't quite fit the 5-paragraph essay structure, you won't do it. And if there's an advanced course in a subject that you love, you won't take it. And that's not to say that our teachers don't work so hard to let our passions come through in the work that we do, but rather that the grading system that we operate under, that's so objective and universal, creates decent but inauthentic results. And it's why students are becoming more risk-averse, generation after generation, more anxious to take risks, but also seeking convenience, not just in their education, but in their careers, in their jobs, and in their family lives. And suddenly, when passion is out of the equation, we wonder where that went. And it's because if we learn one thing from the 100-point grading system, it's that uniformity is success. But regardless of how many harms I can come up with against the current grading system, no criticism has any ground without a comparative. So I looked at other systems. Of course, you could have a completely gradeless classroom, a bit of more radical solution against what we have right now. There's also systems that only grade you based on a standardized test, or even a portfolio that you submit at the end of a semester. Alternatively, you could have letter grades. But what's in common with all of these systems is that they have their downfalls. Letter grading is essentially the same as the 100-point grading system, but just less precise. And standardized testing only focuses on memorization, so we don't get to explore the higher level orders of thinking. And portfolio-based grading systems backload assessment, meaning that you're not going to be focusing on meeting deadlines or growing your time management capabilities like you would elsewhere. And while these do sound like hypotheticals, they really aren't. In fact, they've been done in this very building. Because last semester, I took a physics course, and walking into this class, I realized that there would be no grades at all. Now that concerned me, considering it was against everything else I had grown up to understand. But when we created a rubric as a class with the teacher that detailed different levels of understanding, I suddenly felt more at ease. Because every time I walked into a physics test, I wasn't worried if a typo would ruin my answer on a test, or if I would misplace a decimal point. Instead, I was confident that I would be showing the level of understanding that I had gained simply by engaging with the material and enjoying the class. And it meant that walking out of that test, I wasn't worried about what the person beside me had on question 2, part C. I was only concerned that I showed all the understanding that I already had within me. And I also grew a passion for physics that I didn't think I could have just because of this grading system. In fact, it allowed me to refocus. Instead of looking at the minutia of the mistakes that I could have made, I focused on the bigger picture, the grand concepts that we were learning, and I learned to apply them in my daily lives, all because of the way that we were graded. And I'm not saying that system works for every single class. It might not work for an English class or a history class. But what does work is finding the Goldilocks zone. A zone of a learning system that implements aspects of all of these. Decentralized teaching, an emphasis on teacher-student communication and feedback, and an emphasis on growth first and grades last. And it's no secret that not all of us can change this system. Of course, I'm a high school student, and many of you in the audience are as well. And for those of us who can change the system, we all understand that it's not as easy as flipping a switch. But what I can ask you to do is think back to yourself at age 5, when the world was limitless and there were no ulterior motives, when opening a book meant enjoying learning about something you loved and not cramming for tomorrow's final, and when you could explore your passions at ease in everything that you did. So until we create the next system, I invite you to change. Change your mindset, change your attitude, and watch your outcomes change. Thank you.